Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Just so I can get a sense, who was here for the last session? Could you raise your hand? Thank you. Last time we've just looked at the idea of creativity and how that creates a unique context for evangelism. When we're asking this big question at Alpha at the moment, how do we reach the next generation? And this is a really super practical time where we get to ask questions and we get to disagree maybe with one another. We get to say wild statements and thrash it out. And so nothing is stupid, nothing is off limits, everything is good. So we're going to start maybe with a couple of questions coming out of the last session. So we've got this incredible, delicious, good-looking panel. Why don't we just quickly just run around and just say who we are and what we do, starting with Ruth.
I'm Ruth, and I work for Alpha Innovation as head of digital content and the editor of the Alpha Life magazine.
I'm Ali. I work for Bethany Christian Trust, but also run Alpha at City Church Aberdeen.
I'm Dave, and I run the Alpha Northern Ireland office.
I'm Alex. I work for Alpha. I'm Joseph. I work for the Alpha UK team, looking after students and training and Alpha Labs and a few other bits and pieces.
Good. Excellent. So we also have Kira. Where's Kira? Kira is here with a mic. She is, she's more than a mic. She's a wonderful woman. So let's have some questions. What about something coming out of the last session we had, looking at creativity? I wonder if we've got any questions from that. Maybe not. Maybe we answered everything. Francesca has got a question.
Tim, I love what you said at the end about creativity often comes out of getting things wrong and making mistakes. And anyone that's painted or written knows that. But in terms of Alpha, when you get something wrong on Alpha, or it feels like you've got something wrong and it's not successful, that can be incredibly disheartening. So how do you then pick yourself up and use that as a creative opportunity to develop your Alpha in the future and get more young people in and that sort of thing?
Great. Who wants to kick us off?
I think I would say you're not alone. Everyone who's ever run an Alpha course or done Alpha at all has got it wrong in some way, shape or form. Like when I'm leading a group at the moment and I first week just bombed and bombed and bombed. Everything I said bombed and like kept on making mistakes. Just, it's in my head, I think there's a bit of perseverance.
And Dave, what about, you've been involved in running Alpha for a long time. What are some of the big mistakes you've made?
Thanks for that. Loads. Venue, timing, food, no food, wrong group leaders, like poor promo, everything. We've done everything wrong. The only reason you ever learn anything is because you do loads of stuff wrong. I think probably the biggest mistake, and I think generally probably commenting on courses that I spend a lot of time with, I think the biggest mistake is not evaluating. I think if you never evaluate, you have no clear idea of how or why you're doing it, and you have no clear idea on if it's working or if it's not. So, you know, you can reflect on the end of a course because some people have come to faith, some people have got renewed, and you think that was brilliant, and those things were brilliant in and of themselves. But actually, if you never set out with any clear objectives as to why you were running it, then how on earth do you begin to quantify whether it's working or not? So people will say, well, there's no young people coming to our course, for example. Well, have you ever asked them why? Have you ever asked why they're not coming? You know, those sorts of questions, I think. So probably the biggest mistake where in the early times of running it, not asking the hard questions enough.
Any other thoughts?
I loved what Sandy was saying earlier on about Alpha's not just another course. It's his family, and in family stuff goes wrong, but we sort of do it together and we learn, and so I think it's okay. Like we learn together, we're authentic, we're people, and we're inviting people into community, and it's not a perfect community, so it's probably good they see that from the outset.
And I don't know, I sort of hear a lot of people saying this, and I agree that authenticity is something that's particularly potent with we talk about the next generation, rising generation of adults. Authenticity seems to be this word that's almost like a crown over the whole generation. maybe do mistakes have a role to play in being authentic?
Yes, I think is the general consensus. Yeah, I think so. I think if we try and put on a front, then what we show to people is not real, and I think people get so used to seeing lots of content and lots of stuff that's not real. I think people just see straight through it, and so I think the more authentic we can be, the more we're actually able to deal with real people rather than with ideas and just an abstract thing.
Any other thoughts on idea of authenticity?
I think like mistakes make authenticity real. I think sometimes I know I can be quite serious about things and think, oh, we need to do this right, we need to do this right. And sometimes I'm thinking, oh, because Aberdeen, if you've ever been to Aberdeen, it rains cats and dogs, it snows in June, and we're running the course, and I'm like, oh my goodness, no one's going to come because of the weather. And it's like, just I suppose take a step back, remember I suppose that God is God and God is in control, and also just to have a laugh about Alpha. I think we have a really great team where we're all kind of similar age, and we just kind of, we make mistakes, we make terrible jokes, but we enjoy the terrible jokes because it's real. It's not like we're, I suppose, suggesting that we're the best comedians, because if you've heard any of my jokes, then you'll realize we're not. But I guess it's just that kind of, the mistakes make it authentic a little bit as well for me.
Yeah. Ruth, what are you?
I guess my role looking after content, particularly when we worked on the magazine, authenticity with particularly the stories that we told was very, very important. So I think often when we hear testimonies, it can be like, you know, my life had fallen apart and then I met Jesus and life has been perfect ever since. And for a lot of people, that they can't relate to that story. So for instance, in Alpha Life, which is a magazine, there was a story of a lady who she'd lost her brother during the 7/7 bombings, wasn't a Christian. Ended up, she'd always walked past this Alpha poster, but it wasn't till like a year after she lost her brother that she thought, let me try this thing. Went on Alpha, became a Christian. She had 2 young daughters, the youngest who needs round-the-clock care. And after she'd become a Christian, her husband, who wasn't a Christian, he left her with the 2 kids that she's trying to raise now on her own. And that's still the case when we interviewed her, but she said she was so thankful to Alpha for giving her Jesus, who's been her rock through all of that. And I think so often we can want to like portray the kind of success stories even when we get people up at the end of Alpha, but actually so many people said that that was one of the stories that they engaged with the most because they felt like it was real, and that's life. So.
Great. What about another question?
Oh, lovely. So you'd be carrying the microphone too far. I suspect the situation that I find myself in, I'm sure it's many other Christian communities, is we don't have a lot of young people. Do you need young people to reach young people?
Great question. Who's going to start?
I think it's incredibly interesting because my dad was a youth worker. He was a 40-year-old youth worker, which is not a great place to be. But he did that. And I think the answer is no for the first step. But what your challenge then would be to empower the first young people to reach young people. All you need is you need to give them a tool to reach their friends. So I would really encourage you that no, but there will be a real challenge. And if you can like do it well, but empower those young people early on and go alongside them to evangelize. And like the multiplication will happen out of that.
Yeah, let's have some more thoughts.
I agree with Alex, but also slightly disagree. So maybe I'm just different. But I love hearing from older people. And even when I was growing up, I'd always have like lunch with my friends' mums. I just found them a bit more interesting. And I think our generation is also looking for wisdom as well. Like actually our friends who are the same age and stage as us don't really know that much. You know, if we don't know anything, they probably don't know anything either. So I think there definitely is a place for the older generation, and we can only work with those in our context and community. So I wouldn't let that be a hindrance, but actually see it as like a positive, because there is always a positive.
Joseph, what are you?
I guess there's also something to think about with the future. I think I agree with both of those things, but I guess something I'm trying to think about a lot is what happens in the next stage of Alpha. What happens in 20 years' time when a lot of the people who are running it now aren't anymore? And so I suppose what I'd be wanting to think about is, no, I don't think only young people can reach young people, but I'd agree with Alex's point that, yeah, you want to empower those next people so that they can empower the next people and allow that journey to continue and the baton to be passed on, I suppose. But and you need both. You need the old people to share the wisdom. You need the baton to be passed, otherwise people have got nothing. But you also need to allow them to sort of run in order to get to the next place.
I worked for this church for a few years, and I remember a conversation in that back corner there with someone that said, "I want a mentor." I was like, okay, what does that mean? What do you want? When they described the job description of a mentor, I really realized they wanted a parent. They wanted a parent that maybe, to make up for some of the bad experiences of their parents they'd had before. And I kind of have been asking this question about young adults and next generation for years now. And the one thing that I'm totally convinced at is that's every generation's part to reach every generation. Church is multifaceted and multi-generational, and every generation has a contribution to make. You look at when Sandy speaks, everyone in the room, no matter what the age, is thinking, I want to be on his team. I want to learn from this guy. I want to be with this guy. And I think that in reaching the next generation is a multi-generational thing. And I would say, it's funny because although the older generations have so much, and it's so much necessity that we work together, it only really takes one young guy to reach another young guy, and one young girl to reach another young girl, and it grows from there. And I think it's the confidence to start small and to prioritize maybe this journey that's important. Any more thoughts? Are we done there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the beauty of the church is that it's amazing, but at the other end of the scale, like, it's a little bit crap. It's kind of like family, and that family is amazing and it's class, but then you've kind of got your weird uncle, and he's kind of a little bit embarrassing, but he's your uncle and you love him and it's really important. And it's a little bit like this sofa, us completely. This is a picture of church, us wedged into a sofa, and it's like, the beauty of it is that I think we think a lot of the time that if we just publicize things hard enough, if we just get that one really cool young person who could kind of front this up, it would work. And that's not actually true. People want real. We will never be cool enough to win the next generation to Christ. We'll never be cool enough, but we can be real enough. And I think part of the key of this is just giving into the authenticity of it and actually saying, this is who we are. Once you, if they become a Christian, it's not like they're going to buy into this really cool thing either. I mean, they're going to end up coming off Alpha into the church and they're going to be in that same melting pot. I think it's easier if you've got some people and they feel empowered. I mean, we asked the question with our particular course again and again and again, which was to our younger adults, how do we set the bar low enough for you to invite your best friend, your best non-Christian friend? What makes it as easy as possible or as accessible as possible? So some of the practicalities we can do away with, but some of the stuff we can't change. So I think it's about empowering, as they said, empowering the ones you got, but also I think being real about who we are as a church and who we are, as a people. And part of that is that we're multi-generational, and that's one of the beautiful things of the church. A couple of years ago, I went to a church that works in a student district, and I said I was trying to get them to run Student Alpha. So I was, working quite hard in those days to get Student Alpha working. And they said, well, we're not going to run Student Alpha. And I was like, what's wrong with you? There's thousands of students around you. And they said, well, we talked to the students, and they tell us they don't want to go to another student thing. I spent all my time going to student things, student lunches and student dinners. I spent all my time around students. I haven't been in somebody's nice house for years. Every house I go to is a dump. And he said, when you guys do Alpha and we just go around to Mark, who's in his 40s house to do Alpha, it's amazing. The food's amazing. The sofas aren't broken. The TV works, and it's like they actually were craving some of that stuff that they aren't getting in their world. So, yeah, I guess a few comments.
Have we got room for one more?
Go for it, Alex.
Really quickly, I think when I was thinking about my dad, one thing he did was he realized what they needed and he could do, which they couldn't do. So, really quick example, there was a guy called Chris who wanted to do worship. And so my dad basically pulled every string he could as the 40-year-old and built with lottery funding. They did it all, but he just did all of the daddy work, got a recording studio. So I guess if just realizing the need and what they can't do as young people as well is quite a practical thing. And then let them do the things that they can do. Does that make sense?
It does seem to be that idea of authenticity that sits on top of everything. You look at someone like Mike Pilavachi, who has never, ever once tried to be cool in his life, but just captivates teenagers. And every generation needs every generation, I think. The best alpha I know that works with older people is an older people, senior citizens, a nursing home. It's run by students. And they're motivated and passionate to give to that generation. And I think when you see stuff just in insular generational stuff, for me it's like a cheese toastie without the toast. It's just like a little bit messy and unpleasant. But it's interesting that sort of the themes and some of those answers around leadership and how people came to lead. I'd love just to maybe press into that issue a little bit and ask Ali. So we heard, I don't know him, I've only met Ali last night, but heard a little bit today about how you came to lead and you've got a vision for leadership. Just tell us a little bit more about how you came to lead the course in Aberdeen.
Yeah, so I suppose I did my university degree and I did history, and I kind of wanted to be a sports journalist, mainly because I wasn't big enough, fast enough, strong enough to be a sportsman. So I thought the next best thing would be to talk about it and get paid. So at the time, kind of university was, you do any degree, you can do anything you want. So I thought, great, and then kind of recession kind of hit, which was like, do a specific degree for a specific job. So I got asked if I wanted to be a history teacher, and I didn't, because my dad was a teacher, and his dad was a teacher, and his father was a teacher. So I was like, nah. So I kind of felt like kind of maybe taking a bit of time out, and I've been involved in like youth work and involved in worship stuff. I had never really kind of considered church work, but our church leadership approached me to do a gap year. And it was about, I suppose, progressing young leaders. And I hadn't really seen this in me at all, but I was kind of strongly advised. And sometimes with the way with God, you kind of do something, you say, nah, not going to do that. And then 2 weeks later, you say, actually, I've prayed about it and I'm going to do it. So I kind of did this kind of leadership course and really felt that kind of leadership kind of element kind of growing inside me, and a kind of cloak, a kind of, a kind of mantle on my shoulders of leadership kind of growing stronger through the year. And then I kind of did Alpha, kind of talks out of it. One of the guys who was kind of instrumental in kind of bringing me up in the youth kind of wanted me to do kind of Alpha stuff. And so I did a few talks.
And what was it there when that guy approached you? What was it that he did that maybe really helped you? What did your church do?
I think they saw the potential in me. And I think maybe that potential that I didn't see in myself, they saw in me, and they encouraged me in that, which was really exciting. And then so through that, I started doing a bit of Alpha talks. But then after that kind of gap year, what I also thought was quite important was they didn't kind of burn me out. They didn't give me too much too soon, which I suppose at the time I was a bit confused about. Like, I've done this kind of gap year thing. Why am I not doing loads of other stuff? But I think it was just making sure my heart was right, kind of keeping me on side with God and helping me through kind of a stage of life where if I'd gone straight into that, I might have burnt out, and I might not kind of be in the same kind of position now. And yeah, I think there was that balance of real encouragement of maybe where I wasn't quite seeing what the potential that they saw in me, but then also the kind of mantle of taking time out and making sure that I was getting my priorities right of following God and worshiping Him first before, I suppose, thinking about leadership and almost grasping onto that as an idol. So yeah.
Great. And what's it like as a younger leader to run Alpha?
Yeah, it's really good. It doesn't come without its challenges, I think. I really enjoy it. I suppose, seeing people encounter Jesus really is just a privilege and an excitement to me. I think getting people behind you in the church can sometimes be a bit difficult. Sometimes people think, 25-year-old, doesn't shave. What is he going to bring? But I think when people see that passion, then they kind of really kind of get behind you, and it's been really encouraging these last few kind of courses just to see people from kind of every generation of the church, just saying, you know, praying for you, inviting these people, and believing you, and yeah.
Great. And Joseph, you've been thinking lots about this issue on a sort of wider scale around the UK. We know that the average age of the Alpha leader is actually quite old, in their 40s. So we've been asking questions around how do young leaders come to do what Ali's done. And so what are you learning at the moment?
Two things really. One, I think the thing that I'm learning most at the moment is that passing the baton piece that I was talking about. That young leaders are never going to be great at what they do if someone doesn't help them get there. They need somebody to give them the right tools, to coach them, to share their experiences. They need to learn from what's gone before. And so I think one of the big things we're trying to do is allow that conversation to happen and try and make space for that passing of the baton to happen, whereby young leaders are humble enough not to just run ahead without having actually been past it, but also the older leaders are able to come along and say, hey, we want to actually give you something and help in that passing over. So that's one of the sort of big things that we're trying to explore and trying to work out how best to allow those conversations and experiences to happen, really.
What's that looking like at the moment?
So at the moment, we're trying to just, a lot of the time it's working with individuals, with churches that we come into contact with and with leaders that we come into contact with, and finding space for that conversation and allowing the idea to happen really in churches around the place. The other thing we're doing is a project called Alpha Lab, which are gatherings of about somewhere between 10 and 20 young leaders with an Alpha coach who's a sort of someone who's got some experience and a bit of wisdom about how to run Alpha, and allowing the conversation to happen in a room where the young leaders are able to sort of support one another and inspire one another and have some of those creative conversations of like, oh, we tried doing this and we tried doing this and this has worked and this hasn't worked, and allowing that learning to happen, but also having somebody older there who can say, what about this? And, have you thought about this? And sort of guide conversation and add their bits of wisdom and allow that passing on to happen all in one room. So we're helping to sort of set up loads of those all over the place. And we're sort of getting some great coaches together and some great young leaders together and putting them in a room, basically, and seeing what happens.
Great. How about more questions? Criticisms? Disagreements? Anything from the floor? I've got loads, so I can always... There's one over there.
Hello. How do you prevent your culture from becoming exclusive in that young people think they've got to be cool, play the guitar, dress well, be attractive to belong to the culture that you're creating?
Great. What do you think, guys? So, are we saying how do we balance being cool and being Christian? Maybe I didn't quite understand your question.
How do you prevent being cool becoming the exclusive thing?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So how do we not exclude people? Do you try and be cool, Alex?
It comes so naturally. I didn't want to make a joke about me being so cool, but I just did. I'm not that cool.
I think it comes back to that authenticity thing again. Like, what one person thinks is cool is very different from what another person thinks is cool. And Alex loves rap music, and I just don't understand anything about rap music at all. But both, we get along with one another and engage over things that we do agree on. And also there are people that we both look up to that we can agree on. And so I think. I don't think trying to be cool is a good thing, because cool is only cool to some people. Trying to be real is probably a better way of going and working with who's around you.
I think what I would say is it's really hard question to answer, because cool is one of those things, like the concept of being cool doesn't necessarily exist, or like you can't attain it. You can't, like, something is cool for a really hot second, wearing denim shirts was really cool. I'm playing. No, but like it is all authenticity. As soon as something's not authentic, it is not cool. Cool isn't, you can't pin it up on a board and show what looks cool. You can show what looks fashionable or something else. There are other adjectives, but the cool is authentic.
And what do you think? I mean, go on, Ruth. You go first.
I was actually chatting about this yesterday, but I think particularly, I work in creative, on the creative stuff. Understanding from my point of view when working on a project, we're called to be Christ-like, not necessarily to be authentic to what we want to be doing. And I think that is a challenge, particularly when you're, working on stuff that you want to engage with people. But also I think it is important to be relevant. So whether people think that that is cool or not, but yeah, I think relevance is an important thing. So I wanted to add.
So particularly that idea of exclusivity and inclusivity, surely we're meant to welcome all people, right? Is there a danger in some of the marketing, some of the messages being given today that would be exclusive to certain people?
I disagree. I don't think there's any harm in bits of exclusivity. Like, it's just in my head, it's another word for like context. Like if I think that some people need to be reached through exclusivity and pin them out and go and reach them. Go and like engage with them. And that can look like exclusivity. Like many people won't agree, like be like as wide a bracket as possible. But the thing is with a lot of my friends is they won't attend anything that's catering to a wide bracket. They want to attend the event that they want to go to or the thing that they want to go to. So I think there's a real art in exclusivity.
I think the strength of the new Alpha branding and the new that whole feel is that it sort of is exclusive and inclusive in exactly what Alex was saying. That question mark goes on all sorts of different people. Each of those different people is one person that represents one thing, but we just have lots of them. And so I think, again, with the Alpha Lab thing that we're trying to do, what we're trying to do is get young leaders to reach their mates or to reach the contacts they're passionate about. And that will look exclusive. Something that's catering for people in a retirement home is completely exclusive to people in that retirement home, and students won't be able to go to it. And something that's for students, the old people probably won't come to. So we just need both.
We talked a little bit about values in the session before, and I think that this is like a very delicate debate, because obviously people might be interested in coming to something because they think it's exclusive, but the minute you become a Christian, you come to know Jesus, you realize that it's for everyone. So I think it's important to not kind of missell the message to people on the way in, like it's only about being a certain type of way, then actually when you become a Christian, that you're told to love and be friends with everyone. So I think it is a delicate and sensitive issue, and particularly like working on the digital and print content, as much as it has a specific feel. My hope and prayer is always that people, whether they're old and not interested in photos or videos, would still be engaged, same as the young person who only, tweets and watches stuff all the time. So,
any comment or feedback on that issue from the floor?
To pick up on that for a moment, because I absolutely love Alpha. Yeah. And I love it because it's lots of people like me and different generations that I've been involved with. But I know that when we discuss Alpha in our church and our session and things like that, there's a feeling that it is actually quite middle class. And I think that's replicated in all the different forms of Alpha, from right up amongst the seniors right down to the students and younger. And I think there is a sense, you're absolutely right, I can see how it reaches all these different groups if we're dealing with demographics by age. But in terms of demographics by social class, Alpha is very middle class. So what can Alpha do, particularly with youngsters who have a different sense, a different definition of that, to reach out to others? Because I think that's a real problem in spreading Alpha in many of our communities here in Scotland.
Great. Let's have some thoughts. Joseph.
So, this might sound really combative, but I don't want it to. But it's not really about what we can do. I think it's about what you can do. And we have this tool that God's blessed, and the beauty of it is that it can be run by anyone. It's quite simple. And what we really want to do, I suppose, is allow people to take that to where they want to go. And I really want to see Alpha not being just middle class and it being everywhere. And it is. We see examples of it all the time. But it's about people taking it to the people that they know and working it and making it relevant, making it fit the context. And our job is to help and to try and provide stuff that's useful for doing that.
I think also we could, maybe one thing we are doing in the future is giving platform to those and showing those that aren't middle class running it. I've met a couple of people who run it for homeless people, and it definitely works for the lowest of the low. I was in one of the worst places in America, rife with homeless people, and watching them respond to the Alpha model and the Alpha talks and the small groups and everything. People that don't know Jesus desire community, and they desire relationship with the people around them. And Alpha gives them that. I think it's an incredible challenge that you have brought up, and I'm so desperate to see it in other communities. And I guess because of where it started, I'm not necessarily surprised, but I want to see it spread, because there's such a desire for what the model of Alpha is in the other classes.
I think it's probably what you're saying as well. It's probably a general statement about the church as well. I think a lot of the church struggles to engage as well, and I think it's probably symptomatic of where we all are. I think I find lots of things surprising time and time again. So, for example, we tried to focus our course quite young. We tried to be quite exclusive in who we were trying to kind of reach with it, and then we found out that actually that there were quite a few CAP clients for whom that setting was very comfortable for them, and they really enjoyed it, and it worked for them. So we got a whole other section of people that we didn't think it would reach. I agree with Alex as well in that I helped a course leader set a course up about 2 years ago. It was in quite a deprived Catholic part of North Belfast, and they rang me up to say, we've just received the DVDs. And I immediately began to think, I cannot think of anything worse than those guys listening to Nicky Gumbel. I'm like, this is the worst thing ever. And this person then went on, the next thing they said was, and everybody loves Nicky Gumbel. They just think he's so quaint. We've never heard anything like him before. And they loved him. It really worked for them. So I think this resource can work. I think sometimes there are... I was talking with a guy that works a lot with kind of socially deprived areas, and he was saying that things like discussion is just a foreign concept. That's not really what they do. So I think there are some cultural difficulties with it, because sometimes discussion is just not something they're used to. But I think if the context is right, especially if it's people who are from that background or from that context leading it, it can work. I think things like good branding and stuff is just good branding. I think we all recognize good branding, whether we identify it or not. I think we do, because there's certain things that we like and things that we kind of get into just because of the look and feel of them. So I think the good branding is good branding anyway. I don't think it has a middle class feel, but I think the church in general probably struggles in that way.
Yeah, that was such a great comment. I think one of the interesting things as I look at those running Alpha in the UK at the moment is the younger courses that tend to have broken out of that mold a little bit, particularly with teenagers. And so Joseph and I just this week, we did this exercise where we were mapping out the UK, a big map of the UK, and trying to look at where Alpha's running, where it is, and I think the decisions, because your particular question was what can we do, and I think one thing we can do is really champion and celebrate the leadership in the cases where that is happening. Because I totally agree from personal experience. I ran it in Edinburgh, with actually in a homeless shelter, and all kinds of different. But my dad runs it in a very kind of like not a middle class parish in North Devon. It's the celebrating of that act of leadership that we need to do better, I think. The celebrating of leadership that's different and not homogenous and not the same. You know, what I love about Alpha is it's so relational. And a lot of the leadership culture is relational. So people invite their friends. And it started where it started. You know, we met Sandy Miller is not working class. We all know that. It's very obvious. And that relational side should be celebrated. We should hold on to what's best of that. But remember that if the vision is the re-evangelization of the nations, the transformation of society, we've got to do some wall breaking down. And I think that is happening. But yeah. But it was a comment at the back, I think, or a question. Great.
Thank you. I wasn't in the first bit, so maybe you've covered this, but I'm just wondering about the idea that Alpha has to be a particular age group, or does it? I would love to have young people, and do sometimes have young people, and sometimes older people. And one of the things that I'm involved in is intergenerational stuff in the schools, and that has just exploded and opened up opportunities that are there for those who are almost grannies to grandchildren. And the interaction there has been very exciting to see. And I'm just wondering whether you're getting around the problem of we don't have young people in our church. Is it important that we try and focus in on one generation, or does that matter?
One thing I found with the small group is that afterwards community is really formed in Alpha. So I would say personally, I would encourage, like, on the wider thing, like invite everyone, if you wanted to invite everyone to Alpha, great. But in the small groups, try and contain it by age a little, just because you want community to follow afterwards. And I found that in the one I've done, like I've only done it once, but afterwards I had friends and I was more likely to meet up with them because of the patterns of life that I had, because they were the same age group. And like it was easier to create community around that.
I think in aiming for a younger generation at the moment, a lot of our effort is on that, and that's not because we only want to reach young people. We really do want to see it, people of all age and everything coming to know Jesus. But what I guess what we're trying to do is these are the people that are furthest away from the church, that are hardest to reach, I guess. And so if we can try and put some effort into reaching them, then hopefully those tools and the principles and all of that stuff will reach others through that. So I guess that's sort of why so much of our effort is on that. But certainly it's not an exclusive thing that we only want to reach them.
Billy, a lot of people when they talk about Billy Graham would say that his preaching wasn't that good, really, was it? It was a bit simplistic. And I heard recently, I think he only told this story in the last few years, when he started out preaching, he had a picture in his head, this deeply American picture, of a 13-year-old farm laborer's son from Wisconsin. He imagined this car park, and he said, I've got this American football, and if I throw it, and if he can catch that ball between me and him as the rest of America, and if he can hear me, then everyone else can hear what I'm saying. And although it does, when you hear him preach, like, what was the big deal? Everyone heard him. And I think maybe it's not perfect, and it's not great, and it has a lot of tension in it. But I think what we're saying is this, I don't know if you're honest with the statistics, but it's probably the young adults are the most disconnected people from the church since the Dark Ages in Great Britain. And we're kind of thinking through the lens of the lost sheep, maybe. and being like, what does it mean to live in the heart of that? And I think it's as you point out, there's a massive tension, and I think what's been so good about this conversation, it's shown the tension with actually the church is in its fullness a multi-generational thing, and every generation needs each other. But when it comes maybe to mission and reaching out, sometimes in seasons in history, there's a moment of tension and a moment of breaking around a particular group. And I think, a lot of the denominations, and I sit down and I've seen research recently that says we don't have that long, actually. We don't really have very long. If the current trends continue, it's not a sort of a playtime situation, but as Sandy was saying to some of us last night, this is wartime. Statistically in the UK, if we don't reach young adults, there may not even be a church as we know it now. So that it's multi-generational, that it involves everyone, and that every generation is reached, absolutely. But there's, for us, and we've probably got more questions than answers, but our central question is, how do we reach those that are most disconnected? We've got time for a couple more thoughts or questions. One here. Disagreements. Please do disagree.
It's a completely different question, but I would consider myself quite young. And also there's quite a lot of young people in our church who are quite creative, but we sometimes, not necessarily my church, but I know in other churches, they come up against resistance from, well, I'm probably generalizing here, but older generations who maybe have a taboo on creativity or what's going on. What's the best way to kind of overcome resistance in that?
Great.
As a young person?
I would say two things. Like, communication is so hard and so key, especially if you're creative. Tim will know. I can't do sentences well. I can't, do talking that well. I can't communicate well. But I found that, when you come against resistance, if you look at it as resistance, go into battle, you'll fail, you'll just be disheartened, it won't be very good. I think communicate with them, show them the why. There's a big thing in the why that maybe just isn't communicated. If you just go in with what you want to do, it becomes very hard. I think the why is so key. And if you show them, and if you go alongside, it can loosen the tension. Don't go into battle. It's not worth it, and it's very tiring. The other thing I'd say is, in your own time, just keep going. We live in a world where, set up a Squarespace, create a website, do it. Just have a creative outlet. And just have a creative outlet to do it. And then with those two things working in tandem, you'll keep doing it. They'll see why, they'll see what you're doing, and then hopefully there'll be some sort of...
I think there's probably two things. I think the first is to get alongside them first and foremost. I think community with them is a hugely valuable tool. We have a young couple, they're actually my two best mates. They run a graphic design studio. They were put in charge of the rebrand for our church, and it was Carmody Presbyterian Church. We dropped the Presbyterian, which, as you can imagine, is a huge deal. And it got to session, and they were going on the vote, and there were 3 different identities, and they got to vote on one, and as you would expect, the debate got to, hang on a minute, I don't see Presbyterian anywhere there. And this elder stood, who would have been very against the Presbyterian bit being dropped, and said, look, I'm in community with these guys, they're part of my pastorate. I've got to know them, I've got to see their character and their heart for this. And if they're telling us that this is what we need to do, then that's what we need to do. And it swayed the whole session. So I think what tends to happen in church is we polarize. So we go to our side and they go to their side. It's like girls and boys at a dance, and we never integrate, where actually we need to be together. So I think one of the keys in community inside church is multi-generational, because we get to understand each other, where I don't think we do that very well. I think the next thing is I think beginning to dialogue with your senior church leader. I know so many church leaders who would love younger adults to take ownership for things, to come and say, listen, I've got some ideas, I'm passionate about this. And most of the ones I know would love to release them to do things and would have their back and support them and kind of put them in a place where actually they can use some of that creativity. But I think that requires you to buy into it as well. I'm sure you are, but I think it means that you need to commit to this as a project as well, and not just kind of, hey, I've got this idea, no thanks, okay, I'm off. You know, it's like, I'm committed to this. And so there's probably two things.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, I feel like we're just getting going. Sadly, we have to stop. But none of these guys are allowed to go anywhere. So they'll be just down here, and we'll continue the conversation. I think that's the message that we want to leave you with, is that this is the start of a conversation. It's not all neat, it's not all finished. But basically, I want to be like Sandy when I grow up. I want to be releasing the next generation, and I think it's every generation to release the next generation, to always give away, to be generous. And we want to be generous with this question as well. There's nothing really that exclusive about it being exclusive, I think, is one of the things that maybe we've learned today. But let's continue the conversation over coffee, and I think things kick off again here soon. Thank you very much for coming.